Hey, I'm Chelsea. I own High Maintenance. I wanted to make a couple of semi-brief videos of just kind of like snippets of things that I find myself sort of repeating pretty often that people have said that they found helpful. So I wanted to be able to sort of create a collection of things that might help people sort of navigate hacking themselves. So the first thing that I wanted to chat about really quickly is anxiety. So the majority of people that find themselves looking for help with CBD and anxiety maybe have, there's like two starting points with that, right? So you have people that are familiar with cannabis, maybe have been smoking it either recreationally or medicinally for quite some time, and have sort of like hit their limit with exploring legal cannabis. And they're like, okay, what's next? What can I find? Or maybe they found some relief and then did some research and found that, if they had CBG, CBN, CBD, then they'll get more relief. And so that's sort of the cannabis informed person. And then you have another person whose starting point is CBD because maybe they weren't a stoner growing up. Maybe maybe they've never used recreational cannabis, or maybe a lot of, people that I talk to are, starting to get older and starting to deal with, health issues or recovering from health issues, and are familiar with cannabis maybe from their younger years and are sort of like, so they're open to it and rediscovering. So maybe we have three. And then you have somebody who maybe has no experience with cannabis, and so their starting point is CBD. That's sort of their gateway into learning how to treat things. So I try to, when talking about things, I try to speak to all of those people at the same time. So there are people that are, incredibly articulate when it comes to cannabis, that are sort of jaded about it, and can be very like nitpicky. I'm not talking to you. I'm talking to my aunt who's 78 years old, who goes to Bible study 3 times a week and has never smoked a joint in her life and is never going to, who is going through cancer treatment. So it's important to realize the spectrum of experience in being a human, and try not to be a jaded asshole. So that's my first excellent piece of advice, is do not be a jaded asshole, please. So CBD and anxiety. I'll try to keep this under 5 minutes. The most important thing to do when starting out with getting help for anxiety is to first understand what that means to you. So one distinction. So distinction is a really powerful idea in sort of understanding how to treat yourself. So you have creating those sort of boundaries, separations between physical and emotional, or internal and external, helps to isolate, and then from that you get articulation. You get to learn how to talk about how you're feeling, and then also learn how to listen to yourself so you know if something is helping. So one useful distinction that I've made is, if you have a reason to be worried, then you're worried. If you don't have a reason to be anxious, it's anxiety, So like, it's perfectly natural, like say you're going through a big life change or you're anticipating one, to be anxious leading up to that. So that might be a sort of, yes, you're experiencing anxiety, but it might not be pathological for you. Like, it might not be a lifelong condition that you deal with. Doesn't mean that your experience is any greater or less. It just means that the way that you're treating and the length of time that you'll be treating is going to be different than somebody who has, like, say, a panic disorder. And then people that have actual diagnosed conditions, or self-diagnosed, or whatever the experience is, then you have varying degrees. So you can have social anxiety, where you only experience discomfort when you're, in social situations or having to deal with a lot of pressure, or work situations. So your needs are going to be at the less intense end of the spectrum. And it's also situationally based. So a lot of people that have social anxiety disorder don't experience any symptoms if they're not in social situations. You know, if you have something like OCD, even if you're in a vacuum on the moon, your OCD isn't going anywhere. It came to the moon with you. So it's not situationally based. Even if you're in a vacuum, you're going to have that problem. A panic disorder is something that can come on suddenly, and it can be overwhelming, and you can end up in the hospital. That's a completely different, because that can be more urgent. You don't have preparation for that, you know? So understanding, you know, the word anxiety can apply to all of these situations and be accurate, because it's based on personal experience. It's based on your definition of anxiety is based on your definition of anxiety. It's anything that deviates from your baseline. So whatever your normal mode of functioning is, if you're normally a cool cucumber, you're collected, like not freaking out, and then X happens or Y happens and you're anxious, then you understand cause and effect. You understand the external. And then from there you get to the internal. So when one person says anxiety, depending on their own experience with it, it might be like life-threatening in that moment. You know, it might be, I can no longer breathe, I'm hyperventilating, I'm gonna lose consciousness, I'm gonna hit the ground. You know, you could be a war vet who hears a loud noise out in public, and next thing you know, you're completely disassociated and panicking and freaking and sweating, and that's a lot to deal with all at once, you know? So I always suggest to people, when you want to understand how to make something better, how to treat something, how to heal something, is to first be able to really understand what it is. So identify what are the situations, places, people that cause this reaction in you. What are the physical symptoms that you get? Like, what is you know, people that have panic attacks can also experience like vomiting, gut issues. If you have a panic attack, you can have side effects for days afterward, because your central nervous system is like, it's like goes in full meltdown mode. So you might have nerve pain after. It's just making a list, and it seems like such a silly, like common sense thing to just write down how you feel, but it can be incredibly powerful. So, you know, if somebody is taking CBD for anxiety and they're like, oh, it's not working, and it's like, okay, why are you taking it? Generalized anxiety disorder. Okay. Or, you know, social anxiety. Okay, have you been taking it and then going into social situations? Has it helped at all? Okay, now how much are you taking? Are you taking full spectrum, broad spectrum? And then we'll get into that conversation later. But I wanted to start with sort of like a step one conversation, because they're building blocks. So the first step, if somebody were to ask me, how do I use CBD for my anxiety, is to first be able to say what anxiety means. What are the pieces of that? So if I want to build a house, I'm going to need lumber, I'm going to need shingles, I'm going to need all these different things. So you have to really understand you have to define anxiety, but just for you, not the textbook definition, not the Wikipedia article on anxiety. When you say anxiety, you know exactly in your mind what that means in your life. So if you want to get help for your anxiety, you have to understand if it's helping, and to understand if it's helping, you have to know what you're looking for. So that's going to be sort of like part one of the conversation of how to use cannabis, CBD, CBG, CBN to help with anxiety symptoms, is to first learn how to define it for yourself. Because, you know, a million people can say, I love you, and what that means to them is completely subjective. It depends on what that word means to them. And so define anxiety for you. Because what you might actually be looking for treatment for is maybe the insomnia that comes with being too anxious. You can't sleep at night because your mind is racing. You might actually be looking for treatment for IBS symptoms that come with having an anxiety disorder. You might be looking for help with an exaggerated startle response, which can come from PTSD. All of these are illnesses that have an anxiety component, but treating anxiety is incredibly broad. That's why there are no medical recommendations for cannabis yet because anxiety medicine takes years to develop and cannabis has been illegal, so nobody's had access to it. I said 5 minutes, but I did in 10. So the next part, I'm going to sort of talk about different products, different isolates, different terpenes that are known to help with certain things, because I think it's important for everybody to have a starting point. Where should I start if I have a serious panic disorder and I'm taking 4 milligrams of Xanax a day? Because a person who gets a little nervous before public speaking, or maybe a golfer that gets the yips before they, I don't even know the word for hitting the ball in the hole. That's how sporty I am. But if you read any medical study on treating anxiety with cannabis, you're going to see that the starting dose of CBD for somebody with a severe panic disorder is going to be around 400 milligrams. That's almost this entire bottle of CBD. So that's going to be a lot different than somebody who maybe needs 5 milligrams a day for just to take the edge off of just kind of like being a little anxious. And it's important to have these conversations in a way that's not patronizing or belittling, or it's important to acknowledge that everybody's experience is valid, unique, and important. But those conversations can't happen all at the same time. You can't have a conversation with a war vet and a teacher at the same time, even though they're both using the word anxiety. They have to be separate conversations because they're completely different problems. So hopefully that helps, and then I'll do part 2 and then post it, and then we'll start to get into the nitty-gritty of trying to figure out how to help ourselves. Talk to you later.